Hi, I'm Stijn, and I'd like to invite you on a journey of becoming human again. This podcast explores what truly makes us human, beyond money, beyond success. What can we learn from a cult leader, a chef, a stand-up comedian, or the CEO of a global enterprise? Each episode offers fresh perspectives to help you live and lead with more depth, authenticity, and fulfillment, and ultimately to rediscover what it means to be human. Welcome to the podcast, and thank you for making time to be here. Today, I'm really honored to have Dr. Gita Vaid from New York in my podcast. And thank you so much for being here, Dr. Vaid. Welcome.
It's a pleasure to be here. I'm so honored to be invited.
Yeah. And I discovered, first of all, let's share how I discovered the existence of Dr. Gita Vaid. I saw her passing through an announcement on Facebook on a big meditation conference. And immediately she intrigued me, and I looked her up, and I think the work that she's doing is very interesting and very inspiring. So let's give her some credentials, or let's explain who she is. Gita Vaid is a board-certified psychiatrist and psychoanalyst practicing ketamine-assisted psychotherapy in New York City. She is a co-founder of the Center for Natural Intelligence, a multidisciplinary laboratory dedicated to the psychedelic psychotherapy, innovation, and clinical practice. And the work of Gita Vaid sits at the intersection of psychiatry, spirituality, and personal development. It offers a grounded and integrative perspective on mental health and what it means to be human. So you might wonder, dear guest, why I invited Dr. Vaid, and I can call her Gita, as she said, how I called her in for this podcast. And well, as most of you know, this podcast explores one central question, and how we can remain truly human in changing times of rapid cultural, technological, and political change. And in particularly, how leaders and entrepreneurs navigate these challenging times. And when the responsibilities are high, the pressure is intense, and the risk of burnout or different forms of addictions with leaders and entrepreneurs, that's never far away. So I wanted to offer you, my dear listeners, another perspective, a brand new perspective that you might not have heard of. But I think that is what I wanted to step out of the well-trodden path of conventional leadership and personal development and explore a little bit further. And I think Dr. Gita Vaid is the perfect person to do so. So first of all, my question, Gita, how did you become a psychiatrist? And many people consider a psychiatrist as a weird person, at least in Europe they often do. So how did you enroll into in these studies?
Yeah, it's interesting. I do think as a group, psychiatrists are pretty weird people. So I don't think you're misguided on that. But I think I really became a psychiatrist because I've always been fascinated by people, aside from psychiatrists as a group. I think even as a little girl, I found people very confusing. I was actually in Wales, and as a child, I don't know if it was also the different cultures, but growing up in Wales, but also being of Indian heritage, and of course the different cultures that were at play. But I noticed pretty early on that people's behaviors do not match their words. And I didn't have a judgment about which to listen to. I just was studying people to understand, do I respond to their behaviors and it kind of opened up this whole process of really trying to know about people. I think it was important for me to know about people, to try and enter into their worlds, because I did struggle, even as a little girl, with tremendous separation anxiety. So that started a whole investigation, really, for survival into humans. And it's actually, nothing has really stopped in that regard. I feel like I'm still studying people. I'm still trying to understand people. I'm still trying to understand myself. And you know what, Stijn, the more I look and the more I try and understand, I feel like the more mysterious we are. I don't have clarity. I feel like actually I'm allowing myself to see even more deeply how utterly confusingly unique and depthful and mysterious each and every human being is.
Wow, that's a wonderful perspective, and I think a lot of the people that I work with and of the listeners can relate to what you describe as what am I supposed to do now when the person behaves like this, and the words are not corresponding to what he's saying, and I can't relate, and especially when there is a technological component in between, like texting or mails, and I see it as often people can't relate anymore. So I'm really pleased that you point that out. Now you're specialized in psychedelics. Maybe for the listener who are not really acquainted with what psychedelics are, what is it, and how did you enroll in that?
Well, I'll go back a little bit further. I became a psychiatrist, and then actually I was on a research path. I was very interested in studying research, and early in my career, I did a 180 and became a psychoanalyst because I realized I was actually more interested to diagnose people and medicate their symptoms was not tremendously fascinating. The reason I went into psychiatry
Okay.
really was to try and understand people. And it was really clear to me, even in working in the emergency room at Bellevue Hospital, 4 people can come in with psychosis or depression, and I could diagnose them very quickly and come up with a treatment plan, but it did not at all explain what the meaning of their symptoms were, which were going to be so
Yes.
incredibly unique. So I became a psychoanalyst, which was a very, very lengthy process and a very lengthy training, but it really got to the depths of what I was interested in, which was really understanding the inner world of another person and how through a relationship, we can get to some of the underpinnings towards change. So that was sort of the interesting, and I was very happy practicing, I would say not really psychoanalysis, but I would do a lot of psychodynamic psychotherapy, which I found incredible to go really into the deeper processes and practice of psychodynamic psychotherapy. And when psychedelics came along in my life, I very quickly understood that it was this huge access point to different layers of the self. Historically, I had used medications, maybe prescribed medicines, to maybe have someone be calmer and less anxious or able to cope so they could do the deeper work of healing. Because if drowning, the work becomes to be, let's get your head above water. So if we could stabilize someone with pharmacological agents, maybe they can dive into the deeper process and work of therapy. With psychedelics, I realized, wow, you're actually accessing into the inner world and their defenses are down. It was just the most incredible environment and kind of a psychoanalyst's dream to enter into that process. So I very quickly shifted because it kind of blew my mind, the access and possibilities that arrived when psychedelic medicines are carefully employed in a treatment situation.
Yeah. So the difference between a pharmacological treatment and psychedelics, what is that for you? Just to make it clear for the listener, what is the difference?
In psychiatry, oftentimes in our field, the current climate, certainly in the US, has been much more towards diagnosis of a mental condition and treatment. And the standard of care oftentimes is to really treat mental illness as a disease. So if someone has a depression, diagnose them and treat them with a medication such as Prozac or Zoloft, and then maybe a little bit of psychotherapy, but it's much more of a biological approach. And as a psychoanalyst, of course, I'm much more interested in, I don't mind treating someone for symptoms if they really need them, but really I'm much more interested in, can we get to the underpinnings? Can we actually get to the roots of why someone might be depressed or anxious? Actually do the deeper healing work in a relationship setting rather than just medicating people to actually get to the underpinnings. And psychedelics are very strange because obviously they work on the biology of a person. They are medications or medicines you take, so they do have a biological effect, but they also open up psychological access. So it's a really interesting combination because a lot of these medicines actually have antidepressant and anti-anxiety effects. But I think more importantly, from my point of view, is I actually am less interested in the high doses, which can be very, very powerful biological agents, but the lower doses actually open up really access to yourself. So the mind is in a hyperplastic state, the brain is in a hyperplastic state, And also you have access to memories, dreams, and really new ways of knowing yourself. So it's an interesting hybrid of the biological and the
Yeah.
psychological.
Yeah. I th- well, thank you for pointing that out, the difference, because I have quite a few clients who were diagnosed with depression or ADHD, and they all got medicated. And at a certain moment, they stopped with it, and they felt so much better afterwards. It was not easy because they had to deal with all their feelings and other things and other thoughts coming up. But they felt so much more enlightened, not in having this veil of this, the fog in their brain was gone, as they describe it. I had antidepressants myself for 10 years, and once I stopped it, it was you feel much more enlightened. Yeah, not enlightened, but more open and more receptive for what is showing in the real world. So thank you for pointing out that perspective. Um, Now, the psychedelics that these are kind of plants that are grown like mushrooms, and that you take. How do you use them? How do you use them as a doctor?
I'm going to come to that. I just wanted to go back to something you said, Stijn, because I really resonated with it. I do think medications, standard agents like antidepressants and antipsychotics and all of those medicines have a really good place for people. And they do really help people function when they're falling apart or stabilizing or prevent suicide. So I think they can be really, really powerful. But they also sometimes come to a cost. Like, for example, what you said of blotting one's feelings, which is really important maybe to have a blanket over your feelings if you're just over the edge of being able to handle anything and unable to function. But I do think what you pointed out, for me, having access to your feelings, even though that's a challenge, to then learn how to regulate your feelings and how to manage your feelings, it's really hard work,
Yeah,
particularly in a culture
absolutely.
where I think actually, I go back to that because to me, that is fundamentally, I think, if not the essence, close to the essence of what real healing means. I think more and more we're getting so disconnected from our feelings and learning how to numb our feelings efficiently, not because we're trying to do harm to ourselves, but because we don't have the infrastructure to cope with them. And so we get very efficient at numbing ourselves, dissociating from them, doing all sorts of behaviors to regulate our feelings. And I think actually it's important because for me, becoming human is being able to be more in touch with our feelings.
Well, to become human is to be able to be more in touch with our feelings. Wow, that is one that what I see in my practice as a coach that many people are afraid of, and which is also in modern economical society is not allowed. You have to be efficient, you have to work. Mostly you have to work very hard and leave your emotions behind.
And feelings get in the way. To
Yeah.
be honest, if we could get rid of our feelings, and to different degrees we all do, we can be so much more productive. Feelings are not rational, they're unreasonable, they're overwhelming. They're not, it's very different than the mind, which is logical, rational. And the passions, that's why they're called the passions. They don't have to be rational. They don't follow logic and they get in the way. And so to some extent, who can blame us for wanting to be done with them? Because the more dissociated you are, in some ways, the more effective, efficient, and productive you are. And I oftentimes see people in New York City who are incredibly successful and have done amazing things in their lives. And they come to me at the end of the day because they've checked all the boxes and they have a bit of a crisis. And not often, not always, but oftentimes a big component is they're yearning for something more. And it has to do with their desires, their feelings. Once they've kind of achieved everything, there's a real feeling of hopelessness if you don't have your feeling states. In a way, it's like losing the essence of yourself.
I think many people can relate to that they feel lonely, not because they have nobody to talk to, because often when you live in a big city and you have plenty of possibilities to talk to people or to chat, or you have all the social media, still people feel very lonely. And do you believe that has really something to do with not being able to get in contact with your own feelings anymore. Because in the beginning you said you talked about the self. What is that in your opinion? The self of being able to handle your emotions and to deal with your emotions.
Well, I think that there's a wonderful psychoanalyst whose name is Wilfred Bion. He's one of my, one of my great teachers from his texts. I've been in many study groups trying to really go deep on his work. He's quite complex to understand, at least he has been for me, but I've really made the effort because it really felt like he was speaking the truth in a lot of his texts, which are very difficult to read. But he really talks about, in a simple way, he would talk a lot about why can't we learn from experience? And I think that everyone can relate to that we kind of have an experience and then we keep on repeating these negative patterns. And why can't we really learn from our mistakes, or how difficult it is for us to learn from our mistakes? And really what he got down to is how most of our time we're spending evacuating our emotions. So much energy is spent of not feeling our feelings, not processing our experiences, not being able to digest our experiences in life. And really for him, psychological work was to be able to have the capacity to hold our feelings, to contain our feelings, to digest and metabolize our feelings, and to be able to, in some ways, have a full lived experience. And that to me is profound, because it seems like the most easy, automatic thing that we should all be able to do. But as I gotten older working in practice, I realized how much of a challenge and how much of an achievement it is to really be able to have the capacity to do just that.
I think that's really beautiful. Often when people, leaders or CEOs, they come to me, and usually the first session when we just sit together in silence, or, just sit together and you listen, and then they start to cry. Very often. And I'm always a little bit amazed of how quickly it goes that people show their emotion once you can create a space to deal with, or just to be heard or to be seen. And I think for a lot of people, not only for those at the top of society or of a company, the feeling of not being seen or being heard comes in.
Absolutely. Not being seen, not being heard by another person, or even by oneself, actually, a lot of the time.
Yeah. Not being heard or seen by oneself.
So to even bring oneself to a space, it's a big step for someone to be able to even show up in your office, I dare say, and give themselves that gift of being able to be in relationship with you. It's not easy to get oneself there, because usually when one is in that situation, and I've been in that situation, you're not sure what you're going to find. You're not sure what's going to come up. It's kind of a mystery, even to the person who might say, I'm going to go there to talk about my marriage, my job, my stress. When in that situation, if it's not scripted, or if they are guided, like someone like yourself, who's very, I can tell how effective and how sophisticated you are to sit in silence, then there's a possibility that the mind is not going to run the show and stuff is going to happen. That might be surprising to both of you.
Well, thank you. And I wonder, because at a certain point in my life, there was this, I was seeing a psychoanalyst, and she said at a certain moment, Stijn, I think now it's time you open up a little bit and you do something else than just talking, because you're always talking from your head, And why don't you take an experience with a psychedelic? It brings you into another state of being. I was like, what is this, another state of being? And I was really curious to find out what it was. So I had this one experiment, and I love to take an experiment in life. And it's like you described, we're people, we need to experience. And indeed, it was it was a broadening experience of consciousness, and something shifted in my brain. So I'm really curious to know from you how that works when you work with psychedelics. What does it do with your brain, and what is it that makes you open up and that you arrive in another state of consciousness? How does that work?
Well, so psychedelics to me are just extraordinary tools. They're not for everyone. So you have to make sure it's for the right person. So I wouldn't say one should do this unsupervised or without some real clear checks and balances. But I would say that they're very safe medicines for most people. And there is a lot of legal considerations. To go back to your question, the one that I work with a lot is ketamine, which is safe and legal in the United States, and I think in most countries. Although in other situations, like I am a MAPS-trained psychotherapist, so as part of the MAPS study, I've worked with MDMA in that study. So in every other context, you can have access to these medicines, some of which are legal, like psilocybin is legal in Colorado and certain places in California. So in different contexts, these medicines are widely available, and one can have access to working with people either under those umbrellas or sitting with people in situations where they are available and you can actually buy them from stores. So it's different contexts. Things are changing. But
Yeah.
it is, in the United States at least, we are anticipating MDMA and psilocybin will become legal and FDA approved maybe within the year. But
Wow.
I'll go back to talking a lot about ketamine because that one is very available and is one that I work with very, very often, almost on a daily basis. It's really shifted the way I work with patients in my office. I would say each psychedelic has its own signature. So when we're talking about MDMA, and I'm happy to talk about all of the ones, it's very different than LSD or very different than ketamine. But they all have similar features. And the similarity, I would say, is descriptively well captured by the word psychedelic itself, which was a term coined by the Canadian psychiatrist Humphrey Osmond. And it means mind manifesting or soul manifesting. And I think that from that description, these medicines allow you to access something more about yourself from your mind or from your soul. So you have more access to yourself. It's very much like entering into a dream state. All of us, if we can remember them, have access to really wild experiences at night. Sometimes we only remember fragments of dreams, but if one can remember the dream, we oftentimes experience them as other, that we did not write, direct, and produce this whole experience. But we all know and have a sense, and this has been true of every culture, that there's something very magical and important about dreams. Freud described it as the royal road to the unconscious. And when you have access even to a dream fragment, every element in the dream, if you look at it, is saturated with meaning. And it's kind of mind-boggling to think, that we can remember and have access to all of these associations. But in fact, we do. And there is some higher intelligence in us that is really creating these productions. And in a certain sense, I would say psychedelics allow us to enter into that intelligence within ourselves. But rather than having a person come to me to report their dream from the night before, we're kind of in a shared dream experience together. So you can imagine how magical it can be when working with someone.
So what do you do then? Patients come to you and you give them a small dose, and people go and you ask them questions when they are in another state of consciousness?
Well, I would say with ketamine, it's a very interesting medicine. It's very different, as a lot of these medicines are at different doses. Ketamine particularly is one that can be quite unforgiving if dosed clumsily. So I always do a test dose on a person. So I try and gauge how sensitive they are. That way I can know if they're very sensitive, that a lighter touch is better than a largest touch. And ketamine is used a lot, at least in the US, in IV clinics, just as a flat-out antidepressant. It has a lot of research now showing it's a rapid-acting antidepressant. So people will oftentimes go to a clinic and get an IV put in and they'll be administered ketamine. And in that situation, you can have a very rapid response of symptoms. You need to have repeated treatment sessions for at least several weeks. And in that formulation, sometimes psychedelic experience itself is considered a side effect. And you can see that's very different than me, where I'm looking at the experience with the actual experience, the subjective experience as the medicine. So for me, it's not about getting a lot of medicine into the person. It's really just having them drop in a very meditative state out of their thinking mind into their own subjective experience of what's lying just beneath the surface. I would say ketamine for me is one of the most meditative medicines. People are coming into my office, they're lying on a couch, so I am still using my unlit couch. But it's very different because they might have an eye mask on and music, which we don't typically have. And all these elements weave into the tapestry of the experience. I'm with the person the whole time. I'll give them a tiny dose. I usually use it intramuscularly because it's very precise and exact. It comes on within 3 minutes. During the 3 minutes, I'll guide them through a body scan so they can center their thoughts on their body. And then it comes on very gently. The body relaxes, the mind relaxes, some of the chatter of the mind drops away, and it's a little bit like you drop into a deep meditation within 3 minutes. So in a way, ketamine allows you to become a master meditator in 3 minutes, where your thoughts disappear. You can probably get to that stage through sitting practice, but it's very efficient in opening up those pathways to drop out of your thinking mind and just see what arrives, what feelings come up, what somatic sensations come up. In deeper doses, there might be images. And it's a really interesting experience. For most people, it feels like you're kind of moving out of these fear-based safety structures we live in and moving slowly into safety.
So when would you say that if you do a treatment, if you do these treatments, what are the results that you see with people? What is happening to their state of being? Do they react differently? Are they matching more the words with their deeds? And what's changing inside of them?
Well, what I love about it is it's a way of learning through experience. As a psychoanalyst, we would sit and talk about things. And that's important, to learn about yourself, to know about yourself. But there'd be these moments, even when I would be working with someone, where something had shifted. And what would happen in that moment is, and it would be very mysterious when it would arrive. Sometimes it would take a long time. But I would feel it because the person's defensive systems had dropped, and so had mine. And you could have this very powerful emotional connection. And that would be this unmistakable healing moment. With psychedelics, that happens right away. The person's defenses come down from the medicines, and in resonance, so do mine. It's very much like picking up a baby. It's kind of reflexive. When you pick up a baby, you can't be defended. Your kind of safe survival mechanisms drop away. And in that space, there's a real open field of connection between you and the person you're working with. And in and of itself, that's powerful because it changes the rules of how do we use this? And so really what I do is I sit there and I try and be very present so I can be open to feeling and experiencing whatever I'm sensing is coming through with the patient, to accompany them on their journey and to see what I learn using myself from the unfolding process. Of course, this does get into countertransference. You have to know a little bit about yourself or a lot about yourself to discern what's yours and what's the other person's. But that's a very different process of being present and in relationship. And you can see that it's a really beautiful space to feel someone else, and to have the felt experience of another is a very powerful corrective experience for most of us in terms of building more capacity for regulation and co-regulation. Alongside that, the person, drops into hopefully a non-ordinary state, but I try and listen to see, is something happening? For me, it's like looking in the dark. People are certainly open to talking to me throughout it, but really I'd rather, if they're comfortable, to stay in the experience. Because if you're talking to me, you're getting back into your mind. And it's a very short period. It only lasts about 20 to 40 minutes. Really, I'd rather they just stay with themselves and see what they're noticing. And I'm pretty good at being able to sense if they're anxious, I'm there for them, and I'll say, check in with them, or I'll say, can I put my hand on your shoulder? Can I hold your hand? But usually, as long as they're comfortable, I allow them to have their experience, because what I'm looking for is there a process happening? And then is it complete? Or do they need to keep it going? It's a little bit like trying to sense what needs to happen. Because what you see is when someone drops into safety and they're comfortable, the mind knows how to heal itself. And usually the person is having an experience on the inside that is really, really pertinent to them. And then I'm just trying to translate when they share with me or when I sense of what I think is happening for them so that they can make conscious and have a more access to their own process. It's very, very profound. And
Gita,
kind of mystical.
if I may ask, is this a capacity that we as humans all have in a kind of a way to share and to be present with somebody and to truly listen and to really feel what is the other one saying or what is the other one talking about or what is the other one experiencing? Is this something that you're actually born with, you think, or that we have and that we have forgotten, or
I think we have to cultivate that in ourselves. I think people are endowed with different capacities, obviously. So we all have different gifts. But I think we can, particularly therapists. I think psychotherapists tend to be a group of people who might be more gifted in this area, I think that's what draws them into the field. They're more empathic, perhaps. Maybe have had some early failures in their life that have cultivated this. There might be some people who are not that way, but still go into the field of psychotherapy. But I don't think it's typical. I think most people in this field I think we tend to be drawn to this group, is my guess. Or the people who are less feeling, I think, might be more into research, for example, and into the actual clinical work. But I think we can get better and better at it. I can certainly say myself over my 35-year career, I'm much better at it than I was early career. Being more interested, because I think earlier on I was trying to focus on the theory of what's going on and trying to understand what's happening and try to tell the person I understood what was happening. And I'm interested in that now, but less so. I'm much more interested in sitting with the feelings, understanding the feelings, and being in that space.
I understood that you also work for the Bear Center for Buddhist Studies. What is for you the relation? How does this correlate with the psychedelics and the state of being that you create as a Buddhist? Are you a Buddhist? Are you?
Actually, by birth, but I do believe in Buddhism and their practices. I'm a meditator. I would say that I think there's a huge overlap. Actually, the way I work is very informed by, some of these other philosophies in, meditation and yoga. For me, what I like to do with any psychedelic medicine, really, but particularly ketamine is conducive, is almost drop through the different layers of yourself. What I see is that we can have you learn how to drop out of your thinking mind. The body knows how to heal itself, and you go deeper and deeper within yourself as part of your process, not because I'm giving you more and more doses of medication over the sessions, but you can actually risk going deeper into your being. And I think it has a huge impact for healing in the session, but also outside of the sessions. When we're safe, we can actually stop making so much noise, stop being so distracted, because we can handle more of ourselves, handle more of our feelings. I'll give you an example, because I think sometimes talking about it is very different than actually hearing, what does that look like in the consulting room? I'll describe a wonderful woman who I just started working with. So it's easy to describe because she's top of mind. And this is a woman who had never been in psychotherapy, who is in her 60s, and actually had the brilliant advantage of already being in a transformational process. She came to me quite distraught because her life was falling apart. She thought she was going crazy, but I recognized it as, actually, I think you're not going crazy. I think you're in a process that you don't understand. So that was very reassuring to her. And this is a woman who just really, out of the blue, it felt to her, although it had been going on for over a year, it was almost as if her body said, I just can't do this marriage anymore. She'd been married for 30 plus years, had 2 grown children, by all accounts was in a very, very successful marriage. The husband was very successful. They had a great setup. And the only problem was she was feeling as if she didn't even exist in her own life. And since she was a young woman, she had been cutting herself. And that was something she was very ashamed of, but had been doing throughout her life. She kind of knew it was when she got angry, she would cut herself, and that would be a way of somehow getting rid of those angry feelings. She was very much a good girl, was the good wife, the good mother. And out of the blue, it was almost like she kind of couldn't get herself to just keep on going with the show. And she was trying to. Her husband was like, what's going on? Do you want to get a divorce? And she kind of finally said, no, I don't want to get a divorce. But she couldn't quite stop acting in ways that she didn't even understand, that were jeopardizing the marriage. So she came to me saying, I don't know what to do. Am I going crazy? And she'd gone to some inpatient treatment program. She found it helpful. The most helpful thing she found about it actually was they took away her cell phone for that duration. So that was a challenge. And very helpful. So I wasn't really sure what to expect with this young woman, but I did this. Actually, she was sort of my age. She wasn't that young, but a very, very interesting, very high capacity woman, and spirited, I would say. And I admired her. I admired that she had the courage to look at herself and be open to this, particularly since she said she hadn't done therapy because she didn't think she was very good at it, and she didn't want to keep talking about herself. And I was totally amazed in the first session, she dropped in a very tiny dose and just had the most remarkable experience where she learned so much about herself, where she saw how impatient she was with herself. She had this beautiful, in the last session, she had an image of her in front of a canvas, and she heard herself berating herself, like, why can't you paint? What are you going to put on it? And this harsh tone of her voice. And then she saw a tiny light kind of appear. And in the tiny light, she saw it was a little girl. And she had a really affectionate, kind, patient attitude. And, it was almost like she was being shown in these different motifs, this kind of berating of herself to try and perform versus the tenderness towards a young child and the discovery she needs to learn how to be tender towards herself to bring out the artist in herself. It was just so beautiful. She also saw the cold of the deepest, coldest months in winter, and then she saw right next to it high summer. And she kind of recognized seasons shift from one to another. You can't expect someone to go from winter. There's a whole process that happens. She was being shown you have to be in a process. She said, I think I haven't realized I'm in a process. I have to let myself, like the seasons change. And it was just on and on like this. It was like I was writing notes because I thought, wow, she's extraordinary. She's my teacher. The way in which she was describing, or even the way the wisdom was coming to her, was just exquisite. And I sort of said, you're so creative. You're such an artist. She said, I never saw myself as an artist, but she had to admit, she was like, doesn't everyone have journeys like this? And I said, well, everyone has their own journeys, but this is just so beautiful and so poetic. And that's just a snapshot. This was just, a lot more. Same
I
knowledge.
loved, Gita, when you talked about she recognizing herself again as an artist, this part of that's really deep self-love. And I've written a book about becoming human again, where I describe what it is to be a compassionate person, first of all towards others, but also towards yourself, and what self-love is all about. And I really love how you describe just in one session how people can find themselves this such important part of yourself, to love yourself in your total being and everything that you can do or cannot do, and you really see the beautiful heart that you have, and to be compassionate with the things, have compassion for yourself, with things that you can't do or that you maybe are not the best person at or whatever, but to rediscover this compassionate state inside of you. And I think that is something remarkable, how quickly it goes when you do that in one session, just with one small doses, because for a lot of people it takes a lifelong journey to find that space again, and to
Well, for
be
some people, it can take a little bit longer than one session. She was, as I said, she had an advantage. She might not have thought of it as an advantage. I thought of it as an advantage that she'd already fallen apart before she met me and was in a deep process, which we were able to harness. But I would say another older woman I worked with who is just a real firecracker. This is a real survivor. This is someone who I'm deeply enamored of because she, is just such a powerful woman. She was the eldest of 4 girls. Her father was kicked out of the house because he was not a good dad. And her mother kicked him out because he was competitive and nasty with the children. So she was raised by a single mother who was never there. And she was never there because she was working nonstop to try and support the children. So they knew their mom loved them, but she wound up taking on a lot of responsibilities for her siblings and was a firecracker. Went to, had a lot of anti-Semitism growing up. They were Jewish. Went to a school in a poor neighborhood. She said, well, I learned how to be black so I could hang out with the black kids. And she had a black boyfriend. She got into drugs, truancy, all of it. But she was just so spirited and strong and resilient. She wound up being married, having children, had several near-death experiences from medical events. And she was a fighter and a real firecracker. And she said, I don't want to do therapy, but my doctor thought this might help me. And it took a few sessions because she went straight to these tiny doses to these mystical realms. So I was trying to have a tiny dose just to stay within herself, but I think she was so good at dissociating from herself, she had access to all these spiritual realms. So I was trying to go even lower because I wanted to see, can we drop into you just to be in yourself? And I would say it was the 3rd session where she managed to actually just relax and be in this place of calm. And she said, my husband's not going to believe it, that I've never been this relaxed for 40 minutes. And she just couldn't believe it and almost felt like, did I do something wrong? Am I safe? But for me, it was so beautiful. I mean, sure, the deep access to these spiritual realms that she had was amazing. But by the way, she has that access anyway in life. To me, what was so beautiful was for her to find a place that to me was even more sacred, of being in yourself and feeling safe and just settled. And it was just the most moving thing that she managed to arrive there. She felt a bit scared about it, actually. Like, am I safe? What did I do? Looking around like, is this okay?
because it is so unknown for her. It was so unknown for her.
To her, so unknown. And of course, you can imagine a body under that much stress, how that's very hard to be in survival all the time. But to learn and discover how it is to feel safe, where you can drop down your defenses. I always think that we have walls around us. The more walls we have is the more threats we had. And to have them, the invitation of the medicine, not to blast through them, but to soften them so that by its own volition they can come down. To me, that's a beautiful thing because all that energy gets redirected towards creativity and play, to your point, going back to the artist idea.
There's just some small questions for you. We're almost at the end of the podcast, Gita. And I would like you to complete the sentence. And just going to ask a couple of them because you seem to be a very inspiring person, and I really would like to have to hear your inspiration on these small sentences. The moment I felt most fulfilled was
when I found love.
If I lost everything tomorrow, I would
still feel very fulfilled. I feel like
oh, that gives me goosebumps. Thank you.
Thank you.
If I could tell my younger self one thing, it would be
honor yourself.
The world would be a better place if
we all felt safe.
And the last one. When I think of joy, I think of...
My children.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And maybe one last moment of reflection on, for the listeners, of all the years of experience that you have with all your patients and all these beautiful experiences. What would you say or recommend or give them a moment of inspiration to the listeners to better handle their emotions, or an advice to deal with their emotions, how to do that? What would that be?
Well, I think what I would do is, for me, it's about opening up an inquiry. How can you open up inquiry within yourself? And I would ask the listeners to contemplate, who are you at your best? What's the best of you? Who are you when you're feeling the most alive, the most yourself? And then the second question is, what prevents you from being there more often?
Wow. Very strong questions. Thank you very much. We'll definitely come and visit you when I'm in New York.
Please do. I would love to see you and spend time with you. And likewise, when I'm in Europe, I will certainly reach out.
Absolutely. You're mostly welcome. I have my previous guest, Timber Hockey. I don't know if you know him. He's visiting Belgium on Saturday.
Oh,
So,
wonderful.
Yeah.
That's
So
very
if this will become a pattern that my visitors or my guests of the podcast come to Belgium, you're mostly welcome.
that'd be great. Thank you
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
for having me.
Thanks for listening to Becoming Human Again. I hope today's conversation gave you fresh ideas about happiness, success, and what it means to live fully. If you enjoyed the episode, please follow, review, and share. And if you want to dive deeper, check out my book, Becoming Human Again, and connect with me on social media. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep becoming human again.